Today we are going to talk about the log aggregation and observability in the microservices. But let's first clarify for us, right, for ourselves, what is the observability? Observability, if we put that into one sentence, it's the ability to understand what's happening inside your system from the outside, meaning that it's a way for us to understand what's going on in our system. Three important parts of the observability is the metrics. It's basically the numeric health. It's basically for us to check that what is going on in our system, right? So let's say what's the CPU usage, what's the memory usage, and so on. So collect those metrics, visualize those metrics, and always to make sure that our metrics meet the SLA, service layer agreement, and so have the proper SLOs for them, service layer objectives. The next one is that the logs. For the logs, it's basically that if for every system that we are building, we have to have a logs to see that if something goes wrong, that we can check. But another important point for the microservices is the traces. What's the traces? Traces is, let's say we have 5 services, and the request that was HTTP request, or let's say gRPC request, is when the request is initiated, that request goes through the several microservices, right? We need to have a traces in order to understand what's exactly happening. So why particular, for example, request failed. So what are the tools that we are using? For the metrics, we are using the Micrometer, Prometheus, Grafana, and also for logs, we are using the most popular ELK, which is that Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, and for the traces, the popular choices are Zipkin and Jagger. So let's take a look at the modern observability stack. So let's say that we have two services, service A and B. So what is observability in this system, right? What we do is we are using a micrometer if it's a Java application. So we are collecting the matrix from the services, and then we are saving them in the Prometheus. In the Prometheus, we are saving those metrics, and also we are using that for sending the alerts and so on. And for the visualization, we use Grafana. For the traces, for the tracing the request, we are using one of these tools, let's say Zipkin or Jagger. And for the logs, we have a lot of choices. We can use the Splunk, we can use the Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, and so on. So now let's first take a look at the step-by-step for each one, right? So for the metrics, let's say, what's the metrics? Metrics is if we put that into one sentence, again, it's a quantitative health monitoring. So for example, let's take an example how in a usual application, how we would collect the metrics, right? So we would use probably a Micrometer. If it's a Java application, again, Micrometer is the application level metrics library. It's used in the Java ecosystem, for example, if the application is in the core Java, or in the Spring Boot, or in the Quarkus and the similar frameworks. And Prometheus, so what we do is we are scraping those metrics and we are storing them, and we are enabling alerting. Also, we have Prometheus GraphQL queries for querying those metrics. We use Grafana in order to visualize those metrics, and also we have alerts, right? We're using Prometheus also for alert. Let's say that the CPU usage is spiking, and we want if the CPU usage goes above certain level, let's say 70 or 80. So we want the alert to send to the user, to the developers, let's say. And also we can put the different alerts and different customize our dashboard. So for example, so we can also send the alerts for the request latency, for the error rates, and so on. So for the log aggregation, the next pillar, right, in the observability, log aggregation. So basically, every system should have we should have a log, centralized logging. So in order to trace what is going on in that particular microservice, right? So for that, we are using tools. The most popular and open source tool is the ELK stack, which is the Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, and we can use the other options, for example, Vector or Loki. So for the distributed tracing, why we are using distributed tracing, right? So the main points of distributed tracing is that it detect bottlenecks in the multi-service calls, which means that if we have several microservices, to detect that which service is the bottleneck, and just connect the dots, and also correlate traces with the metrics and the logs. So let's say that we have a logs of that specific microservice, but we need to connect the dots and see that what is the output in another microservice. So the tools that we are using for that is Zipkin and the Jagger. So now let's take a look at the full observability pipeline. So let's say we have an application, and in the application code, so what we do is we are injecting the micrometer, or let's say that the open telemetry is another option. And for the metrics, again, we are using Prometheus and Grafana. For the logs, we have a lot of options. Let's say we are using ELK, and for the traces, we are using Zipkin. So let's compare again one more time the tools that we have for the metrics, logs, and the traces, considering that it's open source or enterprise. For the open source, if we are building our application completely on the open source tools, so for the metrics, we can use Prometheus, Micrometer, and the Prometheus. For the logs, we can use one of these tools, ELK or OpenObserve. And for the traces, we can use the Zipkin, Jagger. But for the enterprise, we can use a New Relic or Dynatrace, which has all of these tools in place, right? It has the part that is used for the metrics, logs, and the traces. Let's take a look at one more real-world example. One more real-world example would be that, again, let's say it's a Java application, and the Java application, we are using Micrometer as a dependency, and so what we do is we have the Prometheus endpoint where we are sending our metrics, and we are visualizing our metrics using Grafana. For the logs, we are using one of these options, usually Elasticsearch log/Kibana, and for the traces, we are using Zipkin or Jagger or other choices. Also, we can use we are using for the alerting, we are using Prometheus or Grafana dashboard, so we can set the alerting to send to a user if certain thresholds has passed. So what are the end goals, right? What are the end goals of having the observability? So we are using metrics to detect the anomalies. For the logs, we are using to find the root cause, and for the traces, to understand the latency bottlenecks and also connect the dots in our microservices. And the goal of all of these practices is to reduce the mean time to recovery. So let's say that something happens in your system, but you are not, even if you don't have your metrics in place, if you don't have your logs, and if you don't have proper visualization, so you may miss the certain signals in your system that shouldn't have been ignored. So overall, all these practices are reducing the mean time to recovery. So, and the key takeaways from this episode is that for the three pillars of the observability is metrics, logs, and the traces. So we have the different tools that we can use. For each of them, and in the enterprise, all in one, we can use either Dynatrace or New Relic. And the goal of these practices, the goal of the observability in general, and each one in particular, is that it's unified observability. It reduces the mean time to recovery, and it improves our service layer agreement and the service layer objectives.